once again in this Sabbath, and want to appreciate for joining this meeting today. So we're going to open with a word of prayer, then we go direct to our study. Let's humble it and pray. Holy God in heaven, we thank you for your goodness and mercies. We thank you for this opportunity once again to meet, to discuss your character. We thank you for the blessings of the Sabbath. We want to ask you, Lord, may your holy angels be amongst us. May you help us to experience the blessings and the fellowship in this Sabbath. Be with us as we are living a very critical, momentous time of this earth history. May you remind us of our high calling, and may you reward our efforts in understanding the divine nature of thy kingdom. Be with each and everyone who has joined us, wherever they are. Let us not be distracted from hearing what you want us to hear this hour. Is a humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Again, it's another opportunity that we have this evening to share amongst ourselves the prophetic word. And it's my great pleasure and honor to once again be with you. So last time, I had the privilege to share with us the idea about voting. And I understand that this subject of voting became of vital importance, especially in 2024, I believe, when Elder Paminda began discussing the subject of voting. And we had a prophetic narrative from Elder Terry going back to previous study to help us see the significance of voting in relation to the Sunday law. So today, I would like us to shift our focus and introduce another subject. That is, we are going to shift our focus to the Middle East. As we speak, I'm pretty sure that all of us are aware of the events happening in the Middle East between Israel and the Palestine, and between Israel and Lebanon, Syria, and right now, Iran. And what is the geopolitical, uh, uh, work of the United States, or rather, what is its engagement with the Middle East powers? So, in times of uncertainty, God will not leave God will not leave their people to remain in darkness. God has to give them an opportunity as an anchor to know where they're standing in prophetic history. And today we want just to discuss that subject. So today we're going to discuss the 2020 Abraham Accord and its prophetic implication in our time. Before we do that, I just want to remind us that if we go back to the history of our reform line, that is the history of 144. We go to 1989, and then I'll just write the dispensation of plowing. That is 2001. In this history, there are a couple of things that were being agitated that was to prepare God's people till the close of time. And one of the things that will be guiding us to understand where we stand in prophetic history and to approach God's word in order to arrive to the right conclusion, that the Lord introduced us the reform line upon line methodology. And with that reform line, with the messenger of the time, we went and began studying reformatory history, how God has been leading his people in the past history and how he's leading them so that they may have a roadmap of how they should be conducting themselves. And that is the teachings that we have heard, especially from the book of Ecclesiastes, that there's nothing new under the sun, and that God declares the end from the beginning. So with this methodology of reform line, if we are going to be safe, because for now, where we are standing from 1999 to 2024, all of us can attest that this movement has survived all tempest and muddy waters through line upon line, understanding logic after logic through prophetic lines. So with this structure of reform line, we introduce what we call reformatory movement. With this reformatory movement, we, through the book Great Controversy, page 343, paragraph 1 and 2, it's a very common spiritual prophecy quotation that I'd like us just to read. So if you turn with me to the book Great Controversy, page 343, the title is Light Through Darkness. So Light Through Darkness is chapter 19, paragraph 2, that paragraph 1, the work of God in the earth present from age to age a striking similarity in every great reformation or religious movement. The principles of God dealing with humanity are ever the same. The important movement of the present have their parallel in those of the past, and the experience of the church in former ages has lesson of great value for our own time. So, in a nutshell, what God is telling us, that He's dealing with the church in the past have their parallel, in the history of the present. So of course, we say God never changes. We have to figure out what do we mean God never changes? Because right now we know there's a time when God tolerated something, which is bad, but there's a time when he says you have to change. So you also have to figure out what does it mean that God never changes. But what you can see, that even in those times, God's dealing with these people, their people have a significant value to his people at the present. So with this quotation, we are able to identify 4 key reformatory movements: the story of Moses, then the story, you can just choose to say the story of John, just say the story of Christ, and then we have the history of the Millerite. Then we have the history right now, the 144. So to understand this history, for example, the 144, we have to get some stories from this other reformatory movement. So this is Alpha and Omega. I don't know how we write. How do we write Alpha? Okay, let me just. This is Alpha of ancient Israel, and then this one is Omega of ancient Israel. So these are just one history, the end and the beginning. And then we have the Alpha of modern Israel, then the Omega of modern Israel, which is our history. So if you go back to this history, if you come to the history of the 144, God expects us to go back to the history of Moses, of the history of Christ, and the history of the Millerite, and combine all those ingredients that we have in this history and try to understand our time. Because the line of the 144 doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that you can get from the Millerite history in the history of Christ and in the history of Moses. And especially in the history of Christ is the history of success. And you compare the history of success of our time, they have a lot of things to learn from. Another thing that I would like us to understand as we come to the year 2020, as we prepare to discuss the 2020 Abraham Accords, there's a story because we want to discuss Middle East. And if we want to discuss Middle East, we usually go to the book Revelation chapter 9. So Revelation chapter 9 is the chapter that takes us to the Middle East. And Revelation chapter 9, this book was brought to our attention in the history of the Millerite here. So at the beginning of modern Israel, this book, Revelation 9, had its significant meaning by one of the leading ministers called Josiah Leach. And by virtue of this history, we expect that the 144 shall not live in a vacuum by just not understanding what the Millerite were teaching us in regard to that subject. And you realize Revelation chapter 9 is a repeat and enlarge. Could we please mute our mics, please? If you're listening, make sure you have mute your mic. So I'm saying Revelation chapter 9 is a repeat and enlarge of Revelation chapter 8. So if you want to understand Revelation chapter 9, you have to understand first Revelation chapter 8. And if you are looking at this boardwork, if you look at this title, the 2020 Abraham Accord, definitely you cannot see it in the Bible. So we are studying external events. And this is just a reminder that external events in their entirety is not the great test. External events, they are there to show us where we are standing in prophetic history and to prepare us internally to have a soul searching to understand the test that God wants us to understand. Yes. So I can say the external events have their cause and effect. I can say so. But understanding external events without having, an internal preparation, a change of behavior and change of heart, it will be of no importance. So external events, they're like landmarks, waymarks, pointing us, showing us where we are standing in regard to the second advent of Jesus, of the second advent of Christ. So it's the same idea that happened in the 1888 history. So throughout the history of 1888 to 1892, we had, two individuals that were raised up. That is A.T. Jones and James, Wagner. And if you go back to the history of 1888 to 1892, all these people, they were raised up by God to give a special message to the church of Laodicea. Of course, the church of Laodicea is good, but they had a problem. So you look at A.T. Jones, his message was basically 99%. He was a great historian. he was focusing on external event. And Wagner was looking at internal, the righteousness of the law, the justification by faith. So if you look at the writings of A.T. Jones, he was an expert of the US Constitution, of external events, the history. And in fact, when we were discussing the Midnight Cry message back in 2018, we referred our material so much from A.T. Jones, The Great Empire of Bible Prophecy. And discussing the nature of humanity, we also learned more about Wagner. So we could see Wagner discussing justification by faith, that we as human, we can conquer sin just as Christ had shown us. Christ took our human nature and showed us that we can conquer sin in our just like Adam was in Eden. Like Adam had no excuse to sin, and Christ came to show that position. Christ came to show that position that Adam had before sin. So internally, as we discuss, for example, the subject of gender and its influence upon our human nature, we need to understand that because there are teachings which says that we cannot overcome sin unless there's a miracle that Christ, can do for our will. But we can overcome the same way Christ overcame, because Christ never allowed divine, to just control him. He had to combine, to have the same, nature that Adam had in Eden, to show us that we can conquer sin, as opposed to what Satan says, that man cannot keep the law. So as you're studying this external event, it's just to remind us that we should not lose focus of the internal part of the internal aspect of our message. Secondly, just to go back to our study, I said, as we discussed in the Middle East, Revelation 9, it was there. John had written it a century ago, but through the ministry of Miller, the Millerite, and other ministers, especially Josiah Leach, they brought to us this idea, of Revelation 9 to understand them in its proper context. So, and I was saying that for you to understand 144 through the introduction of Reform Line, we have to go back to the previous history of Moses, Christ, the Millerite, to understand our time. So, which means this message doesn't allow laziness. We need to stretch our muscle, to struggle a lot, to take opportunities in every meetings that we have, not to take them just lightly. Because I remember all of us right now who are in online right now, I think by you taking opportunity to attend meetings, those private meetings, gathering, the Lord was working, in your heart to, to create that urgency to know what is happening. So I'm saying Revelation chapter 9 is a repeat and enlarge of Revelation 8 or of Revelation 8. So for you to understand Revelation 9, you have to understand Revelation 8. And when you look at Revelation 8, its context is that if this is Rome, let's say Rome, the fourth kingdom, the terrible beast of Daniel chapter 7. So Rome is going to be divided into two. So let's say this is Rome, and then this one is west, and then this one is east. Now, in the west, there is something that was happening in regard to the story of Constantine. I'm not going to give that story. We know Constantine 321 AD had done a lot of damage. So they began, interfering with church affairs. That is 321 AD. The state, when you look at the history of the churches, I think Moroke done that. The history of the church of Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamos, we see the church here began, to compromise a lot and enter into the idea of the state. And that's how, the paganism began entering into the church. So that was 321 AD. By the time we come to 330, Constantine abdicates the throne in 330 and moved the seat to Constantinople in the east. So with this apostasy that is happening here, the Lord is going to allow a tool, to scourge the western part of Rome. And that's where we have the history of the first four trumpet. So the first to fourth trumpet. And the first to fourth trumpet, they are going to ravage the west into 10 regions. And these are the horns that we see in Daniel chapter 7. So for you to understand how those horns came into existence, you have to go back to Revelation chapter 8. And when you go to Revelation chapter 8, we are going to have just a simple structure like this one. The first, we are not going to discuss that chapter because I know it will take time. So I'm just giving us an overview of those timeline. So we are going to have the first trumpet sounded in 395. So to remind us, what do trumpet symbolize? We can go and read Miller's Works, volume 2, page 115, paragraph 3. Can just read it. What do trumpets symbolize in the Bible? When you go to Miller's Works, volume 2, yes, page 115, paragraph 3, it says, in prophetic scripture, the sounding of trumpets is always used to denote the downfall of some empire, nation, or place, or some dreadful battle, which may decide the fate of empires, nation, or places. So it's going to give us an example of how trumpet were used in the scripture in the time of Gideon, etc., in times of Jericho. So go and read Miller's Works, volume 2, page 115. So to give an overview, the first trumpet under the leadership of Alaric began sounding 395. Remember, you can see 395 is post 330. So God was allowing this barbarian kingdom to come and ravage the Western Empire. So we have 395, the first four trumpet sounding up to 410 AD. So this is the period of the first trumpet. So the second trumpet, we are going to have it from 428 up to 470. I'm not sure how this will work out. I just want to utilize the space. So we are going to have 395, the beginning of the first trumpet, up to 410 AD. This is under the leadership of Alaric the Goth. This is the first one. So the second one is going to sound, I put here 476. Genseric, it began in 428. If someone have other dates, can just remind me. So this is the history of the second trumpet. From 428 to 476, under the leadership of Genseric. Now, a problem comes here because you can see there is consistency in the first and the second trumpet. But when you come to let me just write the fourth one. The fourth one will begin from 476 under the leadership of Odiasa up to 490 AD. This is the history of the fourth trumpet. Now, where do we place the third one? And now, I'm pretty sure that all of us have watched, the Vespers classes, presentation number 1 to 21. And in one of those presentations, I think presentation number 2, when Elder Tess was dealing with the issue about simple to complex, he'll tell us that in 2018, God was moving us from simple to complex. Because for example, when you go to complex, this is 2018. And this is the mean I cry message is shifting us from the right wing to the left wing. And here we can say we're just in simple, in simplicity. But now God is moving us to the complex part. And for example, this side you can see a lot of patriarchy. And when you come here, God is telling us that the message is feminism. So you say feminism is the true source of information. But even within feminism, we have also to enlarge it to see what do we really mean by feminism, and we realize that we have this size and shape like radical feminism and cultural, and you begin sifting. That's all about the complex part. On the left, we have the media sources like CNN, like The Atlantic, the Time magazine. But when you read them, yes, they're the right source of information. But when you try to read through them, you also begin seeing problem, misunderstanding. So you see, you begin seeing things that are quite complex. It's the same story we have in the book of Ezekiel, where wheels within wheels. He's seeing things just moving, very complex, but at the end, you end up understanding them. So when you look at the first four trumpet, Elder Tess will mention it in the Vespers classes that this trumpet don't go in consistency. For example, you see the first trumpet, 395 to 410. The second, 428 to 476. The fourth one, 476 to 490. But you realize that the third trumpet is within the history of the second trumpet. The Attila the Huns. My dating is 433 to 453 when Attila the Huns died. So you can see this third trumpet is the third trumpet is in the history of the second trumpet. Could someone please mute the mic? So the history of the third trumpet is within the history of the second trumpet. They are overlapping. So it looks quite complex. If you follow it like in sequence term, it doesn't appear that way. And that is the question that we had for, I think, Curtis Robinson. When Curtis was saying, like, for example, this is a dispensation. The dispensation of the priest. We have here 2019. And then we have here 2021. And then we are saying January 6th is the symbol of Panem. Of course, Elder Tess has shown there's two studies called the war narratives. January 6th is Panem. But there's a problem where we have August 15 here. August 15, 2021 is the formalization, the Taliban issue. And then here we have May 2020. So if you say Panem, it's January 6th. But if you stretch this line, you realize that this January 6th is here. It's somewhere here, and August is behind. So you can see it's overlapping. It's very complex. It's the same thing with this one. The second trumpet is within, the third trumpet is within the history of the second trumpet. Okay, so that's just by the way. So the first four trumpet of Revelation 8 brought down the Western Empire into 10 horns. So if you're going to have 10 horns, this is 4. So you're going to have 10 horns of Daniel 7. But there is something that is happening in the West. This little horn is going to rise up and pluck the 3 horns to become the little horn. So God saw another apostasy rising up in the West. Now in the East, is going to allow another power as a scourge of this little horn that is rising up, okay? So historically, we are going to see that Revelation 9 is coming at a history, the historical context. God is raising that power as a scourge of this little horn. And the little horn, by context, it began ruling from 538 to 1798. This is a period of 1260. So where do you place Revelation 9? Revelation 9 is here, 606. That's Revelation 9, verse 1, the story of Muhammad. So if you were to have a small sketch, just to give a brief history of Revelation 9, just the way you have done with the first four trumpet, we are going to have the year 606, the falling of the star, so 606 is Revelation 9, verse 1. So we are not going to define all symbol. I'm just giving, you can go and at your free time and read two books. That is Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith. And then we have Story from the Seers of Patmos by Stephen Haskell. So these are the two reference books that you can read to understand the trumpets and the wars. And Josiah Leach, excuse me. So 606, the falling of the star. And then the key was given to him in 627, the Battle of Nineveh, AD. And then we have time span, that is Revelation 9, verse 4. We mark it from July 27, the Battle of Nicomedia, that is 1299. Then you add 150 days or years, 5 months. It brings us to July 27 of the year 1449. Then you add another year, that is Revelation 9, verse 15. So this is the history of the first trumpet, 50th trumpet, excuse me. So this is the 50th trumpet up to here. And then from July 27 to 1449, we are entering the history of the sixth trumpet. And the sixth trumpet, adding 391 years, 15 days. It takes us to 11 August of the year 1840. But the sixth trumpet, it sounded up to 22nd October. Of the year 1844. So this is just a brief overview of the study of Revelation 9. So I'm referring us to the book Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, and then Story from the Seers of Patmos by Stephen Haskell, and then we can add Josiah Leach. So going back to our study, the 2020 Abraham Accord, we are going to ask ourselves this waymark, how did it come into existence? So I'm not just going again to give us a story about that. So in the past, we have done multiple study to show us that 11th August 1840 is a symbol of 9/11. But coming the month of, so if you're going to have the structure of the priest beginning 1989, 30 years later, it's going to bring us to 2019. So what is going to happen in 2019? We are going to have an understanding of Daniel 11, verse 40. And this study was done in the month of May, February to May, in Brazil, began in Brazil school, then it ended in Tahiti camp meeting in France. So this is Tahiti, let me just put France. So the Lord, began confronting us to begin understanding Daniel 11, verse 40. And in this structure, just giving a summary, the structure that we developed through this understanding of Daniel 11 verse 40 is this one. So we are going to understand the year 11 August 1840. So we are going to have our reform line 1989. No, 1798. So we are going to have something like this one. So in 1798, based on the book of Daniel, 11 verse 40, based on the version of Josiah Leach, we are going to have three powers. That is Egypt, king of the south, France, that is the him, and Turkey, king of the north. So we have multiple events showing us here that France was more powerful in this history, and it went forward to invade Egypt because France wanted to conquer its mortal enemy, who was Britain, and that's the reason why it had to go to Egypt in order to access the Mediterranean Sea, which was a trade route that Britain was using, and that's the reason why it went and conquer Egypt. But later on, through the support of Turkey, king of the north, together with Egypt, they conquered France. And then we are brought to another story of the year 1831. To the year, let me put it just 1841. So realize that after France disappeared from the scene, Egypt and Turkey, they began another scene of war. From the year 1831 to 1841. That is a period of 10 years. So we ask ourselves, why were they fighting? So if you come to the year 1820s, you realize that there's a war between uh, Turkey and Greece. It's called the Grecian War of Independence. So Greece wanted to overcome Turkey, and Turkey was very weak. So Turkey had to seek assistance from Egypt, and Egypt supported Turkey and they defeated Greece. But after that war, the Grecian War of Independence, Egypt demanded Turkey to pay back whatever Egypt had used while supporting Turkey, and Turkey agreed. But through unavoidable circumstances or what, Turkey did not pay back what Egypt had requested. So because Egypt did not meet the demand, it began attacking Turkey, and specifically attacking Syria, because Syria, who was the king of the north, was under the control of Turkey. So Egypt, because it was more powerful under the leadership of Muhammad Ali, it began invading Syria, and that war began in 1831 in two phases, 1831 up to 1833. The phase one of the war is called Turco-Egyptian War, 1833. That is the first phase. The second phase, again, after 6 years, here they had an ultimatum. So after 6 years, they are going to begin another war in the year 1839. The second phase of the war, from 1831 to 1841. So because now Egypt was more powerful and wanted to conquer Turkey, and we had many nations which had an interest over Syria. So we had four European powers, but now here we have 1840 in our way mark. So we have 1840, and we have some European powers who came to intervene in behalf of Turkey, who was very weak, going to be defeated. And through that intervention, Egypt, like if you read the book Great Controversy, I think that's the verse. We usually ask ourselves, if you want to understand 1840, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. You have to thread a story from 1798, as we have just done. It has to begin here because in most cases, when we quote the year 1840, we do a mistake by just mere mentioning of 1840, but we don't understand how we arrived at that particular waymark. But as a good students of the Bible and history, we have been taught in the movement that we have to be good, we have to thread a story from this waymark. So just to give us summary what had happened here. So in 1840, in August 1st, leading to the month in August 11. So this European powers, I think is Russia, Austria, I think France, I forgot another one, I think in Britain. So because also they had interest over Syria because of minerals and resources, they just came to Turkey and asked Turkey, you see, Egypt wants to defeat you. So what you can do, allow us to act on your behalf and to conquer who? To conquer Egypt. And Egypt could not allow that. Egypt did not want any external power to interfere in their affairs, in their war. So, and Turkey had to accept what the four European powers were saying. So what happens? They just wrote a letter. The European powers had to write a letter asking Pasha of Egypt, to stop attacking Turkey because now they are going to take charge of Turkey affairs. And Egypt had to accept that, but it was very difficult to accept that. So what happens? They wrote a letter. They gave the leader of Turkey, and the leader of Turkey gave that letter to the messenger and asked this messenger, take this letter to Muhammad Ali, king of Egypt, and tell him the affairs of this kingdom is now under the hand of the four Christian nations, the four European powers. And this messenger began journey, I think in the August 2nd, I don't remember. And he arrived to Egypt on 11th of August, 1840. And according to the story, this year, 391 days, when this messenger arrived in Egypt, when he just gave Muhammad Ali that letter, that's where we say that the Ottoman Empire fell in the hands of the European powers. So it's the messenger who decided that fate. He began the journey in the month of August around 2nd, and he arrived on August 11, 1840 in Egypt. And when he arrived there, that marked the end of 391, 15 days. So through this study of Josalich and Daniel 11 verse 14, we were in a position to develop our own model. So through compare and contrast, we are having 1798. We are going to introduce another time of the end, that is 1989. And then we are going to come here to develop another, compare and contrast here, another war, depending on our history, that is 2011. And 2011, this one will be 2013. And then this one will be 2019. And then this one will be Paniam 2021. And by default, the year 1840 is going to line up with 2020. And this is where now our story comes in. So compare and contrast these 2 years, 10 years, you realize that this was over Syria, and providentially, this 10-year proxy war between our modern king of the north and king of the south took place in Syria. So, someone is talking? Okay. So what you're saying, through a compare and contrast, for example, recently you have been taught, if you compare 1798, there was a change of scene from the 5th kingdom to the 6th one. So here, compare and contrast, we can see a change of scene from the 6th kingdom to the 7th kingdom. So if we bring these 3 entities here, Egypt, France, and Turkey, 3 entities, we must also have 3 entities here. And those 3 entities are United States as king of the north, and Russia, king of the south, and then another power we have to see. Because if you come here, the subject was the Middle East, and Egypt and Turkey were Muslim power. Now, when you come here, by default, you have to be taken to the Middle East. And the Middle East that we're going to be taken to, we have to identify by parable who is this power that is going to be number 3 here. So let's say this is number 1, number 2, and then who is going to be number 3. So the concept here is when France disappeared from the scene here, there was a power vacuum left behind. Remember, Egypt was weak, was fragile, had been defeated by France. So when France disappeared, Egypt came back and it became powerful. And that's why you can see Egypt was the aggressor in this 10-year period. So I'm saying after the fall of Russia in 1989, throughout this history, the power vacuum that was left behind was filled in by radical, or rather, let's say the East Wind. Let's use this word, East Wind, or Al Qaeda. So this is just a summary of what I'm giving, because you can go to the study that were done in Brazil to France. Brazil, that is February to March, and then France in the month of May. All this narrative is there that was given by Elder Paminda. So we ask ourselves, I'm not going to deal with this story, but I'm going to deal with this one. So you can see the problem when you want to identify 1840 to symbolize, 9/11. 9/11 will just be around here, but you'll have to, to disorganize this structure. But to be consistent, you realize that 1840, it symbolized 2020. And we are going to have 2021 here. But remember, we are going to develop another structure. So what happened in 2011 is that we are taken to the Arab Spring Revolution. And with this Arab Spring Revolution, it was an outcry in the Middle East against authoritarian regime. So how did this 2011 Arab Spring Revolution began? There was a Tunisian citizen called Mohamed Bouazizi. And Mohamed Bouazizi, he was a vendor selling fruits in the street of Tunis. Tunis is the capital city of Tunisia. So as he was selling fruits, the economic environment was not welcoming to small scale businesses. So the kanjos, the county, the municipality, they were extorting a lot of money, taking a lot of taxes. So this man, he was he was like tired of those kind of behavior. So he decided to go at the front of that municipality. He took, I think, a diesel or petrol, and then he poured it on himself, and then he burned himself because he was so frustrated. And when that happened, because of social media, people in Tunisia in 2010, they took to the street, like, now we are tired with this government. Why can you cost someone to kill himself like this one? And they took to the street. And when other Arab nations like Tunisia, like in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, they came together and like, we are going to topple these regimes that they are suppressing us. So it began in Tunisia, and the reason why we are coming to 2011, by context, is because of United States and Russia. By this time, Russia is resurrecting. 1989, 2007, Russia is coming back on the stage, and 2011, in the March of 2011, through that Arab Spring protest, it arrived in Syria under the leadership, in the leadership of dictator Bashar al-Assad. And when Bashar al-Assad, saw this kind of protest coming to his hometown, that his country, he used a very brutal, crackdown, force. He began, killing people, spraying bullets, like to quench the protest. But in Syria, what really brought about this protest in Syria, there were around 5 kids, and these 5 kids, they were just playing in the street, and they took what do you call, paints. They went to a certain wall, and then they wrote down to Assad. And by that time, it was very difficult for you to do that. Even people feared Assad. But these children, while they were playing, and now they are hearing what things that is happening, they just went to a wall like this one, and then they wrote down to Assad regime. And when the regime saw that, you know what they did? They just killed those kids. And that's what angered people in Syria, and they took to the street. And that's how things happen. And In 2011, who was the president? Barack Obama, right? And Barack Obama had a Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton, because the Secretary of State preaching democracy, seeing these things happen in the Middle East, he was like, this is the time to bring down these autocrats from Muhammad Gaddafi, from this president of Egypt, forgotten his name. You go to Tunisia, he was just, pushing for it. And Assad saw it as a threat. And Russia now saw that, because even this 2011, there was what we call the Maidan revolutions that was happening also in the Soviet, former Soviet countries. And Russia, put in fear that this protest that has just begun in the Middle East, it will spill over to even to Russia. And that's what was happening even in 2011. The likes of Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was here also, that they also took to the street demanding that Putin should be removed from office. So Putin is seeing this, what is happening. He's looking at Clinton. He's saying Clinton is the one now pushing for removal of these dictators. So he began a revenge. He say he's going now to support Bashar al-Assad. And with Russia now coming to Syria, together with the United States of America, that marked the beginning of a proxy war. And we come to 2019. That is what you call we have what you call Raphia, the king of the north, king of the south. And they were all defined by this 10-year period. We know the king of the south won here. Because when we go back to 2016, for example, in this history, remember Clinton was here. He was championing the removal of these dictators, also calling for Putin to calm down. And that's something that caused Putin to hate Clinton so much. So that when it comes to 2016, he had to interfere with the presidential election, and which marked the beginning of the war on the Western Front up to 2019 here, the Battle of Raphia. One thing that I want us to remember, I know there's a lot of story here, just to draw the last structure before we come to 2020. How many minutes have I made? I'm around Mepitisha. I'm not sure.
It is.
How many minutes? Muda gani? Anasema ni muda gani? Trufena, could you please remind us time, because I don't want us to stay here long.
9 sharp. 9 sharp.
Oh, so I still have 30 minutes, eh? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I want us to build, because we have seen that 1840 did not just happen in a vacuum. So which means, by compare and contrast, if you want to understand 2020, you have also to tread a story from 1989. I just want to bring another structure that will help us, come to this history of 2020, the Abraham Accord. So we know. So I was giving a story here. I think I'm not going to repeat myself, because these studies, I'm just trying to condense them. So we are going to have and say like 1989 to 1991 equals the history of Panium 2021 to Sunday Law, let me put 2024. So if that's the case, we are going to have a structure like this one. We are going to have 1989, 1989, then we're going to have something like this one, and say this is 1991, it's a symbol of the Sunday Law. Then we're going to have something like this one will be Paniam. The context is the fall of the king of the south up to 2024. Then we realized that this 2021 here was preceded by a 10-year period. So we'll be forced through parable to go back. My line is bad. Okay, so if we go back from 2021, will bring us to 2011, right? Remember, 1999 marked the beginning of the fall of the King of the South up to 1991, when Soviet Union was, was dissolved. Okay, and 1991, when Soviet Union, disintegrated, we have a leader called Mikhail Gorbachev, and Mikhail Gorbachev was calling for a model of globalism, like no global policeman, no hegemony. But United States, what the United States did, it said no, we are going to define the rules of the world. And remember, geographically, through the study of Acts 27, the ship of Adramyttium begins 1999, which is a bad behavior of the United States. So you expect United States not to give a sound logic here. So by comparing and contrast 1991 and 2024, if there was a policy of hegemony, I mean, draconian policy where we have American police, bad behavior, then by default, you have to be forced to find a story to show that 2021 is, we have to see bad behavior of the United States, of which now some of us can begin to see the RNC, the importance, the Republican Party rising up to isolate itself from the world, like it's a G0 world, as Ian Bremmer can put it, depending on the context, bad behavior. So I'm saying 2021 was preceded by a 10-year period. This is 10 years. By default, 1989 must also be preceded by a 10-year period, which will take us to 1979. 10 years. So you can see number 1010 appears in the military history, also it appears in our time. Okay, so I was saying, when you come to 1989, because Russia is falling, we have also to see the rise of East Wind here. East Wind. And if that's the case, by compare and contrast, we also have to show that there is a rise of East Wind here. We have to be taken back to the Middle East, which is a scourge against dictatorial regime, which is of the Seventh Kingdom, as a scourge. Because when this East Wind was rising here, it was the cause of America's bad behavior, and there was something that happened in 2001. In the same case, if you are going to compare Panium to the Sunday Law, then we have to see the activities of what? Our attention is going to be taken back to the Middle East. So we are saying in 2011, there was a revolution, what we call the Arab Spring Revolution. So if you compare and contrast through parable, definitely we have to see a revolution in 1979. In 1979, we have what we call the Iranian Revolution. So you can see that these 10-year periods, they are preceded with a lot of issues in the Middle East, right? And I'm not going to discuss 1979. Middle East is very complex. We have the Iranian Revolution, we have the Iraqi war, we have the 10-year Afghan war, right? So I'll just recommend us. There's a study that Elder Tess has done. It's called Protestantism Divided. So if you write Protestantism Divided, so please go and watch that one to understand this history. She has given a very nice overview. And then, because also use the media, you'll go and watch these two PBS Frontline documentary. Number one is called Bitter Rivals, Part 1 and Part 2. Bitter Rivals. And then, yes, I'll bring another one. So Bitter Rivals. So we'll go and watch that one. So remember, we say that in 2019, the reason why I bring this structure is to show that there is rising of East Wind here. and there's the rising of east wind here. We have true compare and contrast. And what brought about the rise of the east wind is this history that preceded here and the bad behavior of the United States of America. After Afghanistan, it began rising up as hegemony. It did not want to cooperate with the Middle East countries, including Afghanistan, to do some kind of reparation, including Pakistan. So please, I'm not because of time. Watch this presentation by Elder Tess. She did it, I think, in 2020. It's called Protestantism Divided. It's going to spare her time to discuss Middle East. So also here, from 2011, the beginning of the Arab Spring Revolution and the proxy war between United States. This one is King of the North versus King of the South. This also is King of the North versus King of the South. Same entities, Russia, United States, Russia, United States. So as the King of the South was falling here, the East Wind was rising. At the same thing, the King of the South is falling, the East Wind is rising. So we need to ask ourselves, what prompted or what paved way for the rise of the East Wind? So just to write the last structure, in order to come to this 2020 Abraham Accord. So we have here 1989. Just going to repeat our structure. So we're going to have 1989, then 2001. All of us know what happened in 2001. And then our last waymark here, we are going to have 2024. 2024, you have the image of the beast set up, which is something bad. And if something bad happened, just like this little horn was rising, and God allowed another power to rise from the east. So when the image of the beast is set up here, God is going to allow a scourge against this power here to disturb its foreign policy. So we are going to have 2001, and 2001 is a turning point in our history, and it really shows us the character of the seventh kingdom. So after 2001, if you watch this presentation, Protestantism Divided, the mastermind behind 9/11 were 19 members, terrorist members, who were rising up in this history. The East Wind was rising here. And 15 members of 19 were from Saudi Arabia, 2 from United Arab Emirates, and then 1 from, I think, Qatar, and 1 from Egypt. So there's no individual from Iraq or even from Afghanistan. But you can see the president here. Who was the president here? George Bush, all right? So George Bush was the president. So we expect George Bush was even supposed to be a president. Yeah. So if you go to the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 11, verse 2, it gives us the history of Middle Persia. And Middle Persia, it began with Cyrus to Darius, and this is 536. And then after Darius, we had someone called Cambyses. And then after Cambyses, we have an individual called False Madis. False Madis. So if we compare and contrast, this is 1989. Cyrus will be a symbol of who? Reagan, right? Reagan, yeah. So Reagan, and then Darius will be a symbol of Bush Senior. And then Cambyses will be a symbol of who? Clinton. And then False Madis will be a symbol of who? Bush Jr. So if you go to the history of the book Great Empire of Bible Prophecy by A.T. Jones, he will tell you this man, False Madis, was not even supposed to be who? To be the king. There was a kid, he was calling, his name was Madis, right? And then there's another person, I don't know how to can use the language. An imposter. He came and he pretended to be Smarties. That's why he's called False Smarties. And you go to the history of 2001, because it's Bush. Compare and contrast the 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore. If you go there, the one who won the election was who? Al Gore. I don't know what had just happened in the election of this state called forgotten the name. Someone can shout that country, that state in the United States. Florida, okay? Say Florida, okay? So Bush was not supposed to be the president. That's why during his administration, he had blunder after blunder, blunder after blunder, a lot of mistake. He went to Iraq because of bad policy. So when it comes to 2014, our first Sunday law, then we come to 2019, our second Sunday law, then we come to 2021. If you were to trade a story, for example, here, want to understand the subject of the East Wing, because when these Twin Towers were brought down, through miscalculation, through false madness, the bad behavior of Bush, he invaded Afghanistan. He may have given good narrative why he went to Afghanistan, because Afghanistan maybe harbor the terrorist. But why didn't he just invaded Saudi Arabia, where 15 members, those 15 members, they came from that country? And if you watch Elder Test's presentation, she will tell us that there were credible sources that the members of the Saudi royal family, they knew what was going to happen 9/11. But United States, because of its interest in the Middle East, especially Saudi Arabia, it just blindfolded itself. So it invaded Iraq, weapon of mass destruction, falsehood. And with him invading Iraq, they toppled Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein was a Sunni. And when Saddam Hussein was toppled, they installed a Shia, who is President Malik. And President Malik began invading, persecuting the Sunnis. And when he began persecuting the Sunni, it became a sectarian war between Shia and Sunni until it brought the rise of ISIS. And by 2014, we have the declaration of caliphate, ISIS, after Baghdadi captured Iraq. 2019, this ISIS is restrained. And then 2019, we are told something is going to happen. So in 2019, we had what we call the German International Camp Meeting. And in German International Camp Meeting, we know throughout this period, radical Islam or East Wind has been restrained. And now here, Elder Test is going to make a prediction that at Paniam, we are going to be taken to the east, to the Middle East, through the study called the Third Adoki War. So go and watch that presentation called Third Adoki War. It was a prediction that at Paniam 2021, we are going to be taken back to the Middle East. So, which means between the period of 2019 to 2021, we're not going to have anything here. It's just like a vacuum. We need to understand what was happening leading us to 2021. So in this period, we have 2020 now here, 2019 to 2021. But 2020, we know there was a fallout between this movement and FFA in 2019. And FFA, they went forward and say, in this period, we are going to be taken to the Middle East, and that East Wind, radical Islam, is going to attack who? The United States of America. You remember the Nashville prediction, July 18. And it troubled this movement a lot. And it was done by someone, I'm not going to mention the name. So there was a prediction by FFA that in 2020, there's something that is going to happen. But us, through a compare and contrast, we are going to see that there's nothing going to happen in 2020, because the messengers, they are pointing us to 2021. So we don't have a model to show that there's going to be an attack in the United States. And that presentation, it was very nationalistic and Islamophobic, the attack of Nashville. So for us, we were to see what was happening in 2020. Now, in 2020, the president by then was Donald Trump, and he initiated what we call the Abraham Accord. At the same time, he was tapping into the idea of, pulling the troops out of Afghanistan. President Obama, President Trump, and Biden, all of them had this idea, let us come out of Afghanistan, let's come out of Afghanistan. But they were restrained by their national security advisor. Like, this is not the time to come out of Afghanistan. If you come out of Afghanistan, something may happen. So so you can see the idea between 2019 and 2021, the administration within the United States, they want to pull out of Afghanistan. That's number one. because the idea of Afghanistan is going to confront us in 2021. Second thing is Abraham Accord now. There's something that happened in 2020. Now, in 2020, this brings us to another subject called Gaza, because Abraham Accord is connected to Gaza. We are going to see that. How is it? I mean, Palestine. So, what is happening here? For you to understand Palestine again, I'm going to introduce you another Frontline PBS documentary. It's called, what is that documentary? The Oslo Accord. Yeah, just type the Oslo Accord by Frontline. It will give you the history of Palestine and a 2-hour presentation again. So with the Abraham Accord, it was Trump's policy to normalize relation between Israel and a handful of Middle East countries. I think number one was United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, and Sudan. So with this handful of Middle East countries, because in the Middle East, Trump feels like, countries like Iran, they're a threat to Israel, right? So he wants now to create a pathway where a handful of Middle East countries can recognize Israel as well, a state, as a sovereign nation. But on that table, with this handful of Middle East countries, they were enticed. If you recognize Israel, what happens? We are going to give you arms. We are going to work together to support each other. But why are these Middle East countries, a handful of them, are bowing to Trump? Because they did a mistake. Remember this history, if you watch this documentary called the Oslo Accord, 1999 to 1995, there was chaos between Palestine and Israel, and they wanted to have what we call a two-state solution. But that two-state solution did not materialize. We had radical groups within Israel and also radical group within Palestine, what we call Hamas. They did not want anything to do with a two-state solution. So they shattered that Oslo Accord that was engineered by President Bill Clinton in Norway. So we have had tensions here. When it comes to 2002, we have what we call the Arab Peace Initiative. And the Arab Peace Initiative is that no Middle East country should normalize relation with Israel unless they also recognize Palestine as what? As a state. So throughout this history, there is a quest, there is a call to recognize Palestinian as a state. But the hindrance, is this radical fundamental group. But now in 2020, as Donald Trump is coming to power, he did a mistake, recognize, for example, Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. He took his US embassy from Tel Aviv and took it to Jerusalem. Those are the mistakes he did. But now with this one, he's bringing a handful of Middle East countries just to create a pathway for recognition of what? Israel. But as a country's diplomat, he was also required to discuss the issue to do with what? Palestinian. These two nations, that are intertwined in conflict. If you discuss Israel, you also discuss what? Palestine. You don't just want to discuss one nation and you leave another one. That was a catastrophic foreign policy failure by the Trump administration. So if you go to Google or Wikipedia, type just the 2020 Abraham Accord. I know it's large. So the failures of the Abraham Accord is to recognize Israel as a sovereign state and also failing to see that Palestine also is in the mix. Their issue also have to be addressed. So in this period of vacuum, we see a lot of blunder, a lot of foreign policy mistake by the Trump administration. And when even Biden came, Biden also came with these compromises. He did not also, he continued, extolling this Palestinian Abraham Accord just to recognize Israel and leaving behind the Palestinian issue. So the idea about Abraham Accord and Afghanistan issue here is going to confront us in the period between Paniam and Sunday Law here. And the first thing that began to confront us is Afghanistan. When Biden decided to pull troops out of Afghanistan with a lot of miscalculation, with a lot of failure to put a good infrastructure in Palestine, that once United States pull out of Afghanistan, at least the rights of women and young girls will be protected in Afghanistan. He never had a good pathway. It was a catastrophic foreign policy failure by the Biden administration. And when he pulled out, the Taliban took control of Kabul in August 15 of 2021. And that one became our waymark. Here, it became our formalization. That was one thing. Now there's one mistake about Abraham Accord. Remember, Palestinian was done what? Was sidelined. There was no issue. Someone can go to 2020 Abraham Accord and find something good, but the mistake is Palestinian was sidelined. And throughout this issue, as I was saying, as from Panium to Sandelo, we have to be confronted with Gaza issue. And I'm saying the October 7 of 2023 was a response to America's bad foreign policy failure with this 2020 Abraham Accord. So you can go to Foreign Affairs magazine. You can see experts discussing the Abraham Accord, the failures that was already seen, which was going to confront America here. And remember, America from 2021 to 2024, the Sandelo, is the seventh kingdom rising up. And when seventh kingdom is rising up, just like this little horn was rising up in darkness, God has to allow a scourge. And right now we have been taught we should not be looking at Russia, for example, and China and this Hamas and the Houthis as a bad thing. How should we look at them? Yes, we can see them that they have bad behavior, because we cannot condone what Hamas had done on October 7 by killing innocent people and women and children, and what they have done now. But what you can see that, for example, Russia, China, and these fundamental groups, they are defending us against who? The Seventh Kingdom. They're telling us, look at the Seventh Kingdom, bad behavior. Why are you blaming us and you're not blaming who? America. If you want to blame us, also blame who? America first, because they're the one who they're setting this foundation of chaos in the Middle East together. So the 2020 Abraham Accord to normalize relation with Israel and to leave Palestinians behind was the stepping stone for this chaos we are experiencing right now in Palestinian. Of course, we don't need to be Islamophobic or what you call anti-Semitic, all right? We have to balance our thoughts and to see where the problem is coming from. So I'm saying, as FFA were predicting 2020 attack, we as a movement, we needed to take time, understand this silent period, what was happening between 2019 and 2021. There was a thorough preparation. There was some things happening in the Middle East that is going to confront us from Panium to Sandelo. First Afghanistan, and then we're taken back to Palestine. So remember another thing, because this 10-year period was discussing Syria, and now when you come here, we are taken to Afghanistan and Palestine through the Abraham Accord. But one thing you cannot evade, where do you place Syria here? Because the king of the south is falling. This is the national Sunday law, but we also have the global Sunday law, and the king of the south has to be there. So where is Syria? When it comes to 2024, the event of December 8 of 2024, when Bashar al-Assad was toppled from the government, it was a clear indication that the king of the south has fallen, because the king of the south was the patron to who? To Bashar al-Assad during this 10-year period. So we should not take December 8, 2024 as just a light thing. It was very critical in that moment. The time's over, right? Okay. So how many minutes?
6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay. So that's 6 minutes. I'll just use it for summary. Thank you. So I'll say the reason why we are coming here to this point is that we want to understand the external event where we are standing. because the image of the beast has already been set up here. And that gold, I can say that image, the construction of the image, because before you set up an image, you have to do what? You have to construct it. Still, you have to construct the image. And that construction of the image, I can say, began January 6, 2021, with the events of January 6. Up to we come here, we have the Vespers classes telling us how the image of the beast will look like. By the time we come to RNC 2024, the image is done what? It's set up. So people are watching, are looking at that image, how it's created. Now we want to see what? The act, the speaking. And that speaking, we have to see it, through the period of 2024 to close of probation. So that's one thing. But as the seventh kingdom is rising, by going through history and understand that when a draconian power is rising up, God has to allow. He's just using it as a scourge to tell us, to expose the hypocrisy of this power. It's the same thing we come to this history. So we went to the first four trumpet and understand that as the pagan Rome was introducing, bad policies and paganism into the church, God had to bring the fall of Rome through the first four trumpet. And in the first four trumpet, you can see the complexity part of it, whereby the issue of the third trumpet is in the issue of the second trumpet, and that is the complex part of it. But that is not our story. We want to understand how we arrive at 1840. And 1840 is the one that shows us that 2020 is a prophetic waymark. And if 2020 is a prophetic waymark, through the study of Daniel 11 verse 40 that was introduced to us in 2019, we had to figure out what was really happening in 2020. Because here is Middle East. Here also you have to see issue to do with what? Middle East. So you have to compare and contrast. I may not have a lot of information to exhaust the year 2020 or 1840, because I know people have different capabilities to discern what was happening in those histories. So as you are listening, you can also have your private moment to figure out what was happening there. So we said, we wanted to compare and contrast this history. We say if there was a 10-year proxy war from 1831 to 1841 between the king of the north and the king of the south over Syria, through methodology, we have to see the same scenario repeating itself in our time. So we have 2001 to 2021 over Syria again. And we gave us that Syria came into scene in 2011, the Arab Spring Revolution. And this 2011 did not begin here. It began in Tunisia with the death of Mohamed Bouazizi that sparked that outrage. But in Syria, it began when these young kids, they were playing and they were writing the name of Bashar al-Assad on the wall saying, down to Assad, down to Assad. And when authorities saw those kids, they fired them. They killed those kids. And the people, became angry. They took to the street. And Bashar al-Assad, began using force to suppress the regime. It was so very brutal. And Assad, when he began killing innocent civilians who were protesting against his draconian policies, there was something what you call the Arab League. The Arab League is just a union, like a bloc of Middle East countries. When they saw that, they say, Assad, you are going to tarnish our image. They remove Assad from the Arab League. But Assad was brought back to the Arab League in the year 2023. And when he was brought back, people were like, no, we don't want Assad. He has done a lot of damage. And 2023, at the height of the Hamas-Israeli war, it brought down the end of Assad in 2024. So we come to this way, Mark. This is Rafia, a prediction of what is going to happen in 2021 in our time, about the fall of, the coming again of east wind through the study of the third Adoki War. So we can compare and contrast that one. Again, we say, if this one point to this one, 1991, we have to see the rise of what? America is an hegemon. A nationalistic power, a global policeman with bad policies. So 2021, by compare and contrast, we have to see that in 2024, by default, we have to see the rise of seven kingdom in steroids from 1989 here. So we compare it. We saw that 1989 was preceded by a 10-year period, and then by compare also 2021 was preceded by a 10-year period. 1979 was a year of revolution. 2001 is also a year of revolution. And we came here to trade a story, 1999, 2001, bad behavior of the United States, and false president was here, George Bush, who led the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he created a breeding ground for radical fundamental group. So we come to our first Sunday law, our second Sunday law, our third Sunday law, and our fourth Sunday law, the Sunday law for the 144, 10-year period. We have the rise of ISIS. A global caliphate was put in place after Baghdadi captured the second largest city in Iraq, Mosul, in the month of July and declared himself a caliph. 2019, that same Baghdadi was killed. So East Wind was restrained here. And when East Wind was restrained, there was a development in the movement. We had what we call the German International Cup meeting, where the history of the First World War was introduced to us, and Elder Tess is going to make a prediction that in 2021, we are going to have our attention again taken back to the Middle East. And in Providence, something happened here. But with that between 2019 and 2021, we see that there was a period of silence here. But in this period of silence, we had bad predictions, especially from FFA about 2020, July 18, etc. But we had to trust the lines. By the time we come here, we are taken back to Afghanistan. Again, Palestinian issue through the Abraham Accord, which was Palestine was set aside. It paved the way for the rise of Hamas in this history. So you can see the rise of East Wind here at the same time here. But the problem is we cannot see. Of course, we have seen in 2024, we are still in that process, and we don't know what is happening now, because as we approach the close of probation, something has to happen. So, see, time is over, right? Okay. So I also draw another structure, but that is for another time. So I want to thank you, because I know we are not going to have Q&A right now, but God willing, in future, I think this could be, I will take time again, because we have a lot of studies that people come to present. We'll be having Q&A another time, or if you have questions, you can just inbox me. So I want to thank each and every one of us for joining us this moment. We're just going to have a word of prayer, and then we'll close it there. Let's pray. Holy God in heaven, we thank you for your goodness and mercies. In times of uncertainty, God, you never leave thy people in darkness. You give us evidence after evidence upon which to base our faith. And we ask you, Lord, we remember the women, young girls, and other people who are living in the war zone region, in Israel, in Gaza, those who have lost their life, those who are wondering what the future will look like. May you, Lord, give them hope that soon this war will come to an end. We pray that as we are approaching the close of probation, and we are in the judgment of the living, help us to send our petition, to put our sin, and to see ourselves even as you see us. Bless those who have been attending this class, and those who did not even manage to join us. May you continue reminding us of our high calling. Be with the leadership of this movement, the members at large, the Bible workers, and in our struggle, may you meet our daily needs. As we part this evening, as we continue preparing for tomorrow meetings with other speakers, Elena, may you prepare our hearts. Is our humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.